Y'all, Wizard101 is changing every single shadow and shadow enhanced spell for every single school in the upcoming Darkmoor update. And every day this week, different content creators are teasing these upcoming shadow spell changes for every single school. Now, yesterday, I uploaded a video on console day 1, so I missed a whole day of teasers. We're doing something cool today. I'm covering both the ice shadow spell teasers that dropped yesterday and the fire shadow spell teasers that dropped today. I've linked the original videos covered by 8JJ and Bobcat in the description. Show them some love. But today, I wanted to talk about how I think the new fire and ice, shadow and shadow enhanced spells are going to affect the game. We're going to be starting with fire. The shadow form, the pure shadow spell that they're tying to fire, is the new Shadow Fiend. Now, this is a really cool spell. I started with this one on purpose because this is very similar to the myth shadow form that we saw 2 days ago. But what does the spell do? It costs a shadow pip like every single shadow form that we've seen so far with these teasers. And in return, you get a whole fire pip back. So basically either a power pip for any school or a fire pip that you could use on spells like Brimstone. And for the 3 rounds that this is out, you get 25% outgoing damage, 25% outgoing pierce. This is shockingly similar to Shrike right now. However, you get a little bit of less pierce, you get a little bit more damage. I could see this being a very versatile aura. However, the name of the game with every single shadow spell that we're going to be talking about, fire and ice, is that everything will have backlash associated with it if it costs a shadow pip. During the 3 rounds that this is out, you can basically reduce your backlash 5% at a time. And the way that it works is, at the start of this, you take 15% of your backlash maximum, but you could reduce it 5% at a time. And you have 3 rounds to reduce a backlash all the way to 0, so you could do this without taking any damage at all. And how do you reduce a backlash? All you gotta do is look at the bottom text of this card. Basically, the way to reduce backlash on this is to have traps out on your opponent. This spell will consume a trap on your opponent every round that it's out, and if you can do that successfully for 3 rounds, you take 0 backlash. Essentially, you want 3 traps on your opponent out while the Shadow Fiend is out. Now, what I thought they would do, because this is like the fire shadow form, I thought they would, you know, kind of like tie this in with damage over time. But I guess most damage over times that, you know, have like 3 copies of them, like Fires of Mars, are very expensive, and you're giving out pretty useful damage. So I guess they made this into a trap consuming thing instead of a dot consuming thing. I'll be honest, that makes this way more usable than it otherwise would have been. I think that was a very intentional choice to make both the myth and the fire shadow forms consume traps. What does this mean though? If you want some really high pure shadow forms and you don't want to take lash, multi-traps and multi-trap counters, they're both going to be very relevant in the meta. Now, just like every school, fire also got a shadow creature that it's going to be getting. Now, this spell also costs a shadow pip, also is going to be something that you start with 15% lash for casting. But the difference is this one, it doesn't consume traps on opponent. This one is a trap counter, as in traps on yourself. Now, we literally just talked about how with all these pierce auras, self trap counters could be useful. So every round that this is out, again 3 rounds, this will consume a trap on you, and every time it does that, it'll reduce your maximum percent lash by 5%. Ideally, you get rid of 3 traps on self, you go from 15% lash all the way to 0 for casting this. And in addition to taking the risk of lash and losing a shadow pip, you also get a small 75 damage hit and 70% overtime universal traps. That's what those are. Keep in mind, they're universal, meaning any school can use them, but they're overtime traps, meaning they only activate on damage overtime. But I'd say the real value of this is if those multi-trap counters become meta, because so many people are using the new Nova and the new Fiend in order to get Pierce, right? Now, just like every school's getting new shadow-only spells, we're also getting updates to every shadow-enhanced spell. The way this update is going to work is every shadow-enhanced spell is going to apply backlash that you can reduce over 3 rounds. But in order to make those shadow enhanced spells, you gotta fuse new base spells with pure shadow spells. So every shadow enhanced spell in Lavron right now is gonna have a new base version, essentially, right? So like Raging Bull, for example, you're gonna have a base Raging Bull that you can make into a shadow enhanced Raging Bull that could do lash. Let's go over all the new base fire spells and the new shadow enhanced fire spells that can literally hurt you for casting. Starting right off with the new FFA, really cool. It's a hit that also does a fuel, very similar to old FFA, y'all. This is back now without a shadow pip involved at all. I love this spell. This is literally, if y'all been playing the game for a while, FFA used to do this. It used to hit and then do many traps that you could use over many rounds. Now, the other version of this is a little interesting. What this is basically saying is it'll do 450 damage for 5 pips. And then if you have heals on yourself, for each shield that you give up, this spell will give you 265% trap. Now, I would love this spell If Heck Hound didn't already exist, we already have this exact mechanic for 4 pips, meaning a little bit easier to use. That is a very repetitive mechanic in my opinion. I think left side FFA base, maybe a lot of people could use it. The right side, I see very little use if Heck Hound's already a thing. But here's where things get interesting. Let's say that you combine the new base FFA with one of the pure shadow spells we just went over, right? Like maybe a Shadow Fiend or a Dark Fiend, depending on what the formula for this is. Now we're cooking with some craziness. The PvE allowed version of the new Shadow Enhanced FFA is a monstrosity of a hit. 1600 damage. This is also enchantable. We're looking at a 5-pip hit that does nearly 2000 damage with an enchant. It also naturally gives you 40% fire traps, so it's like a even better fuel. But like every shadow spell, this can hurt you. You start with 15% lash. In order to reduce it 5% at a time, every round after you cast this for 3 rounds, you need to have a heal on yourself that has to be consumed essentially. Now that is very hard to do. They are going to be changing Whiteheart Fire to potentially become a double heal, I want to say, but it's going to be like a 7-pip lore spell. And even if you have 2 heals on yourself, for you to take no backlash from the, you know, I guess a PvE allowed version of this or the PvP allowed version of this, you need 3 heals. That's very hard to do. In PvE, I think the backlash is simply worth it. In PvP, obviously, you got to think about it. The PvP version's very similar. It's a hit, but the traps are just better. There's 75 traps, which is ridiculous, and you get 5 of them. But again, the risk of taking 15% of your HP in backlash for not putting heals on yourself, that's a big risk. It's definitely hard to do heals on yourself compared to other ways to reduce lash that we've seen with other teasers. Moving on to the base Raging Bull. Now in PvE, this is a traditional AoE. It hits and does a mantle essentially. And big news for PvPers, the bottom path, now it does a hit. It detonates up to 2 dots, but unlike right now in Live Realm, the multiplier that it does when you get those dots detonated is 130%. If you're unfamiliar with the way detonates work, basically if your opponent has a damage over time, spells that detonate will do all the remaining damage on that dot all at once. And then this spell specifically will multiply all that damage by 30%, 130% essentially, right? So you get 30% extra damage than you otherwise would have. Going from a 180% multiplier to a 30%, that's a big deal, right? Like it's like a feint versus a regular trap in terms of multiplying. But the Shadow Enhanced version, now we're looking at something that doesn't even detonate. So honestly, this is like the end of 180% detonates, I guess, for Raging Bull. But they went crazy with this. So let's say that you were to combine a shadow spell with base Raging Bull. The top path does 1000 damage in AoE damage right away. Ridiculous damage. And you even get 975 extra damage added on. However, it's a bomb dot and there's 3 dots and they all detonate in 6 rounds. You gotta wait for 6 rounds for the second part of this to activate. Now, let's say that you're in a team setting where someone is able to detonate those dots. This is the new best AoE in game. It's literally a 2300 damage AoE. Obviously, so much of that damage, you have to wait. So you really need to detonate to get the best bang for your buck. But this could be some really cool new damage output that we haven't seen yet. And the bottom path, the damage is more heavy on the dots. So it's like a 930 damage, but you get 1500 damage in the form of 3 dots. Also, you have to wait 6 rounds to get these to detonate. And both of these, in order to reduce backlash after casting them, you do need dots out on your enemy. Now, this is a very, very weird one. Am I to really believe that you do this, and then the damage over time that you put on from the actual spell are going to get consumed by the backlash mechanic? Because then it's stupid. You never get to see the damage over time at all. So it's almost like very, very unusable unless you were to cover the dots and then you have to wait 6 rounds, right? We've seen a few examples where the way to reduce backlash kind of like messes with the way the actual spell works. So I think this is one of those that they need to revisit for test run. Moving on to the new base blastoff. The top path, the one that's allowed in PvE, it extends your damage over time by 1 round. If you have a really powerful damage over time, I guess you can get an extra round. And then you also get a bomb dot that hits in 4 rounds. It does 760 damage. I really don't like all these bomb dots. They all don't break shields every round. You have to wait the whole rounds that these are out to see any damage, and your opponent could just remove the dot. But I guess at least the bottom path is both a bomb dot and a regular dot. This is very similar to Elephant. So basically, you get 2 bomb dots, and then if your opponent has shields, you can clear them to get even more dots that do damage every round. Is it better than Elephant? Honestly, it depends on if your opponent can remove those bomb dots or not, right? Elephant removes shields. for damage over times, but it does upfront damage. This new blastoff can do basically just only damage over time, right? So that's kind of like the choice that you have to make. It's a cool choice. At least it's something new. And the shadow enhanced version in PvE, very cool AoE that does a massive 1700 damage bomb dot. And this one, at least, you don't have to wait 6 rounds. It's only 4 rounds. However, still quite a bit of waiting compared to just hitting with any normal AoE. And I'm not really sure that extend mechanic is really that worth it, because most AoEs are trying to do a lot of damage right away. So I'm not sure it's that good in PvE. And the bottom path, once again, you're seeing 2 dots, right? We're seeing 560 damage in the form of 2 damage over times. And then also 1300 damage in the form of bomb dots. This is just a spell that does a lot of dots. Some of them bombs, some of them not. And the way to reduce backlash after casting these is for your enemy to have shields. Now, a fire can't put shields on an enemy, so this is purely a reactive move, and you get a lot of damage delayed. I'm not really sure how usable that is in PvE or PvP, y'all. That little bomb dot mechanic, I think, makes Raging Bull and Blastoff a little bit iffy. The next one we got is a new base s'mores. Now, just like FFA, the base s'mores is a hit and fuel. However, it's a fuel for damage over times, meaning it's not just pure damage that will use these traps, it's only damage over times that will use these traps. As far as the bottom path, it does a lot of upfront damage, and then if you have heals on yourself, you can give them up for damage over time. So basically, if you have some weak heals, you can turn them into some powerful damage over times on enemy. Very situational, but the shadow enhanced version, it is really, really cool, but keep in mind, once again, the way to reduce lash with these is to have heals on self. Yet another heal on self kind of mechanic, very hard to do on a fire. But let's say that you were to have heals on yourself and you feel comfortable doing this and not taking backlash. The PvE version's really cool. It does 1620 damage base and does 670 traps for overtimes, essentially. So I guess when you have 670% traps, you could see a dot getting buffed massively over a lot of time. And the bottom path does a ton of damage up front and does a ton of dot damage. However, you have to have heals on yourself to really not take lash. That being said, 1600 damage for 6 rounds, and it's not a bomb dot. The bottom path, I could actually see it being useful. Can we talk about how much damage the bottom path is doing? Let's say you did this in PvE. It's about 3000 damage. And yes, it's hard to buff a damage over time, but that is still ridiculous. That is literally more than most gambits do in PvE for giving up stuff. Now you're naturally getting so much damage. It is a very, very heavy hitter. I just hate that you have to give up heals. I would always use the bottom path of the shadow enhanced s'mores in PvP or PvE simply off the damage. This is a very, very good finisher, very high source of damage. And finally, we have new scorching. The base version is just a very, very simple hit and heal, but it's only 1 heal, so it's kind of hard to use it a lot. And the bottom path, this could be good if this creates multiple heals. I'm a little skeptical, but basically you clear shields for heals, and the more shields you clear, the more powerful the heal becomes. Now, let's say that your opponent has 3 shields. There's a chance that the heal becomes so powerful that it splits into 2 heals. And we're already seeing all these scenarios where the shadow forms and various other things are giving up heals for extra stuff. Could be a very, very important spell if multiple shields can create multiple heals. I have a feeling that's not what happens though. And then after you clear all those shields, you do damage. I do like this. This is a new, very cheap hit that can hit through shields, essentially, right? Let's say you ignore the heal part. What this does is, on paper, for 4 pips, the bottom path anyways, 400 damage through shields. Very, very good new hit. I could honestly see myself using it for that alone. And then the shadow enhanced version, you either get a 4-pip hit that just does 1300 damage, that does less damage the more targets you do. It's a selective targeting spell. Or you get a spell that does both 700 damage and 900 healing if you want to use the one that's only allowed in PvP. Now, both of these, in order to reduce lash, once again, you have to have shields on your enemy. I've seen a pattern with a lot of these. You either have to have very hard things that are hard to actually get on you, like heals, or you have to rely on your enemy doing things that they naturally are going to avoid anyways against fire, like self-shielding, for you to reduce lash with some of these spells. I don't even think that 900 healing is worth it if you're going to take so much lash. If you take 15% backlash on a fire, even a low HP school like fire, that is literally like, I want to say 1600 HP. That is a little too much if you're not going to heal it all off. I guess at least if you're running outgoing, that 900 healing you might get it back at least. So maybe this might be a case of a spell where the backlash isn't as important because it's healing. But I don't know how much access fire has to healing. Maybe that's something that will change in the meta to make a lot of these spells usable. You do see a lot of damage output, but you have to take advantage of heals. Now let's talk about the ice spells, the school of defense. The new shadow form that I think a lot of people are going to use is Shadow Sentinel for ice. So just like, you know, every other shadow form, you do have to give up a shadow pip. You do have to risk 15% backlash, but the way you reduce lash with this is just to have shields on self. The easiest way to reduce lash, in my opinion, with all of these. You put one triple shield on self for 0 pips, and you're taking no backlash from this. Now, I love this in a team setting, y'all. This might be one of the coolest things I've ever seen for PvE, but basically, right, you intercept 50% of damage from teammates, just like I think Shadow Sentinel already does, meaning in a team setting, let's say a boss hits one of your friends, you take 50% of that damage and take it yourself, and then added on to that, for the 3 rounds that this is out and active, you also get 30% reduction in incoming damage, essentially like a brace, but even better than a brace, because now we're looking at 30%. Very cool. In PvP, if you have shields on self that you want to use, especially if you think they're a liability, like we just talked about a bunch of fire spells where you don't want shields on yourself, right? Then this could be a very good way to remove 1 shield at a time for 3 rounds, take no lash, and have 30% res. I love this spell. It actually takes advantage of some ice defense in a way that we haven't seen in a long time. And the other shadow form, Dark Sentinel, the way to reduce lash with this is that your enemy needs to have blade, so it's a very cool blade counter. There's a lot of strategies where people blade a lot. You could use this on any single school, right? And you could just remove 1 blade at a time, take no lash, and you also get 3 shields for defense in return for that shadow pit. Again, surprisingly usable, right? This is like a very easy way to remove blades while defending yourself and using a shadow pip, just gaining other pips as you go. Both Shadow Sentinel and Dark Sentinel are very useful. I did forget to mention that Shadow Sentinel also gives you an ice pip. Very, very good shadow form. Now let's talk about the new base spells and the shadow enhanced spells that you get when you fuse them with the new shadow forms, right? New base abominable, very cool. It's just very basic. Hit and tower shield, something you love to see. 385 damage and a tower shield. And while that version's really cool, the other version's also decent. You do 375 damage for 5 pips, but in order to get shields from this spell, you have to give up traps. So the right side of this teaser is a trap gambit. It's kind of hard to get 3 traps on your opponent easily, but the shields that you do get for giving up the traps, if you go that extra mile, are better. They're 75% and they're specific to the school of your opponent, meaning they're set shields. Now, if you were to combine the base abominable with the shadow spell, now you get even more powerful abominable. In PvE, you're looking at a very, very cool 5 pip hit with an enchant, does nearly 1500 damage and gives you a tower shield. And in PvP, the one that's allowed is also really cool. 730 damage and you get 3 80% shields based on the school of your opponent. Essentially 3 set shields to your opponent. Now, if you want to cast this, however, you do risk taking lash. You have to have traps on your opponent with this. You basically consume 1 trap at a time for the 3 rounds after casting this to take no lash from such a powerful spell. I would have loved if Abominable was get rid of shields on self for lash type of thing. That's very ice, and I think Abominable is a very ice spell, but unfortunately you have to have traps to use this. That makes this a little bit less usable. I will say this though, I don't mind any of this because I do think it's bringing back some powerful shields for ice. Now, the new base climaclysm, very interesting mechanic. The top path is a hit that also does a 60% ice trap, a very, very powerful trap. I would arguably just use this just for a buff. And the bottom path, very similar to Abominable. You do still get that trap, however, to do it, you have to give up something. And in this case, you have to give up weaknesses on your opponent. So I don't know, bottom path could be useful, especially in PvP. I like that the traps are more powerful because you have to give up weaknesses or 70% on the bottom path. Now, the shadow enhanced version, this also, to reduce lash, you do need weaknesses on your opponent. It is somewhat doable. There is synergy with weaknesses and ice, so keep that in mind. However, it is hard pip-wise to put a lot of weaknesses on your opponent. But the top path can do over 1,000 damage selectively targeting, so you can basically you can enchant this and do 1,300 to a single target, probably like 1,000 to 2 targets, and then the drop-off happens the more targets you have. That's what top path is. And bottom path, you don't even need to have weaknesses for this to automatically give you a bunch of traps. It does 500 damage, does a bunch of 65% ice traps. But keep in mind, y'all, ice is a very high HP school. You don't want to take too much backlash, so you really only want to use bottom path if you can reduce backlash, meaning you want to have weaknesses on your opponent. Ideally, you want to get rid of 3 weaknesses over 3 rounds with this spell. Now, the new freeze ray base, the top path is a very, very easy to use AoE, something you could use even quicker than Frost Giant, 455 damage base. But I actually think that the bottom path is easily the coolest version of this. This is a new hit that ignores up to 5 weaknesses and then it hits. This is very, very similar to Woolly Mammoth, but for 6 pips. Essentially what the spell is doing is it clears weaknesses on yourself, and for every weakness you clear up to 5, it puts a minus 20% weakness on your opponent, and then after doing all of that, it hits for the 460 damage. Now Woolly does the exact same thing, but it does 750 damage for 9 pips. I would argue 9 pips is crazy just to get rid of a bunch of weaknesses. I actually think the new bottom path freeze rate is the new best hit through a weakness for ice. So definitely an upgrade for anyone that wants a good utility through weaknesses on the weakness countering school that ice is. Let's say they were combine the new freeze rate with a shadow spell. Now you're looking at an AoE that can do 940 damage to everyone. Pretty decent, especially compared to the top path that we just saw. And the bottom path does a hit and then does 2 minus 45 weaknesses on your opponent. So instead of being a weakness clear for weaknesses, you basically just get those weaknesses up front. To reduce backlash, you guessed it, you do need weaknesses on self. On a high HP school like ice, I wouldn't even consider using this in PvP unless I already had weaknesses on self. Now let's talk about what I think is really cool, the new base snowball barrage. The new AoE that you get for PvE is a 65 per pip AoE, meaning finally we have like a Tempest but on ice. I think that's really, really cool, y'all. I think the fact that you need a shadow pip to use the current version of snowball barrage no matter what kind of holds it back. Now no matter how many pips you have, you can AoE on an ice just like Storm. It's just obviously less damage per pip than Storm, as you would expect for a defensive school like ice. And the bottom path is yet another weakness clear, now for 6 pips. So you can either turn weaknesses into weaknesses on opponent, or in this case, weaknesses into shields before hitting. And this is very, very exciting. Let's say they were to combine Snowball Barrage with the Shad. Now we're looking at 135 ice damage per pip AoE top path, meaning every single target that's out will take this much damage, and it's enchantable. That top path is busted. If you have a lot of pips, I want to say this might actually be the best AoE in game, especially considering all the rounds that you're building those pips up for, you could buff. And the bottom path is still really cool. It's a hit that gives you 360% shield. Again, in order to reduce backlash with these, you need weaknesses on yourself. A lot of these seem to be like reactive to having weaknesses on self. It's a little bit harder to do than things that you could actually do yourself. However, I still think that top path, I don't know, man, but like top path with or without shadow pips, game changing. And finally, we have the new base shatterhorn. This is a taunt spell top path. It hits and taunts for 2 rounds, meaning only the person that's taunted can be targeted by single hits. It could be good if you need like your friend on your team to not get hit if they're low on HP or something. And the bottom path gives up traps on opponent for weaknesses after hitting. It's a pretty decent hit. I don't think traps are easy enough to put on that they're worth doing all this for weaknesses. And the Shadow Enhanced version, a very powerful 5 pip hit that does 1100 damage with an enchant, about 1500 damage. So you are looking at, with Abominable and Shatterhorn, some pretty decent single hits in PvE. This still keeps a taunt mechanic, but in order to reduce lash, you need to have traps on your enemy. I'm seeing a lot of times where you need traps on your enemy, so this might actually become something you start expecting. And bottom path Shatterhorn, it's a very powerful hit and weakness, 345 weaknesses out of a 600 damage hit, but because it uses a shadow spell again, you could take lash. You need traps on your opponent with this to reduce your lash to 0. All in all, y'all, I think ice compared to fire got a lot of good stuff for them. New shadow form, that's dope. Bunch of really good PvE stuff. I'd say fire got some explosive damage. They just struggle a lot more, in my opinion, just to reduce their backlash, which makes it a much harder choice. But hopefully I explained all of these spells. Hopefully y'all are enjoying the full-blown coverage of every teaser. Make sure to check the original teaser. Show the people that make content in this community some love. Drop a like if you enjoyed. Which spells are y'all going to be using, y'all? Let me know in the comments. Drop a like if you enjoyed. Leave us a review. And as always, if somebody hasn't told you're awesome today, they doing something wrong. Stay awesome. See y'all soon. And yeah.